Hello and welcome back to Sitting In. This is episode 5 you're listening to, and you're joined by us three, the Sitting In hosts. So we're doing something a little bit different today. I am hosting this one, so bear with me as I kind of feel around in the dark and try to get through this. But before we jump into the episode, we have a really great one for you today. It's a really interesting topic, and we all have something to say about it, which is going to be fun. I just want to say, on behalf of all of us, that we really appreciate, your input, you guys' input, you guys listening to it as well, and supporting the podcast both by sharing it and checking out our merch store as well. And on the topic of merch store, if you do want to help out the podcast and you've been listening for a little bit, you can see what we have to offer through our merch store, which is available as a link in the bio. So if you want to support us that way, then go ahead. But let's jump straight into it then. So the three of us talked about what we would discuss today in episode 5, and there was a bit of a unanimous vote, I suppose, from us all to talk about a recent blog post that I put out, which was titled "Guitar, the Problem-Solving Instrument." And really, towards the end of that podcast, we're doing the podcast. Towards the end of the blog is a simple question, which is really, what does it mean to be a modern guitar player? It was phrased a little bit differently, but that's pretty much the essence of it. And so we thought this would be a really great thing to talk about as 3 guitar players here talking about, the guitar and what it really means. It obviously kind of inspires some really interesting conversation of, in 2021, for those either learning or those who are kind of on the journey, what does it mean to be a guitar player? So before we kick it off, I suppose, we want to really discuss what the question means philosophically. And first off, it really kind of breaks down the detail of like where do we land as guitar players in the 21st century as well, because the guitar really, on the grand scheme of history, if you like, or in the timeline of history, is not a super old instrument. And so if you were to think about when the modern 6-string guitar, 20 however many frets that you have, fret guitar had come about, we're really only looking at maybe 250 to 300 years of the modern guitar. And in that time, the guitar has changed significantly. And there have been some really key players who have helped the innovation of the instrument along. And it's really interesting now, being in this place with technology and being able to play music and share music and play with others as well, that you're still seeing developments both in the creation of music and the performance of music from guitar players of all sorts, all kinds of genres, all kinds of traditions as well. And so it does raise the question of, what does it mean to be a guitar player today? So I thought I'd give my point of view first as well. And my point of view is very much the answer, which becomes the title of my blog post, which was "Guitar, the Problem-Solving Instrument." For me, I see the guitar as an instrument that has always been treated by its players or by its educators as an instrument that is ultimately an instrument that has many sort of flaws. It's an instrument that continually needs some kind of innovation, whether that's to do with technology or whether it's to do with the physics of the instrument itself or the playing style and that kind of thing. And, all of us here as guitar players, we all have different techniques. We all have a different way of looking at the instrument, of understanding the fretboard as well. And I'm sure, can all attest to the fact that the guitar is a very hard thing to master, and there is no one methodology that works for it, which is really cool. So from that, I want to hand over to Callum as well, because I know you've probably got something to say about it. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think my first thing that I go to when I think about that question, but just the whole philosophy as well, is just how I always think back to like some of the virtuosos, and one of the ones that I always go back to is Eddie Van Halen. It's one of his pieces that I've done for like an end of year show studying in college. I took his song Eruption, the really, really famous one, and took lots of different elements from live versions and stuff as well. And what I found through that is just the complete sheer innovation all the time. There's constantly things that just make you go like, what is that? Like, how is he making that sound? And it's coming from a guitar. It's actually that the first thing that ever got me interested in guitar in the first place was this flurry of hammer-ons that Eddie Van Halen does, where he's kind of just like hammering on and off, but then he's got his thumb kind of moving down the other side of the string, and it's creating all the harmonics as it passes through. Um, I heard that, and I was just that's literally what got me started. I was so interested in how a guitar. I probably obviously didn't know anything about the guitar, but obviously I'd seen how the guitar was played, and that was not what I was used to. So the complete shock factor just got me super interested, um, and it makes me think so much about like other techniques and how other people have just found their own kind of thing, but created something completely new on the instrument as well. And one of the people that um, I spent a lot of time watching his videos was a guy called Troy Grady. I don't know if you're both aware of. Yeah, Troy Grady. Um, one of the things that he done was just broke down a lot of these virtuosos techniques. And the thing that kind of occurred to me was all these virtuosos a lot of the time had the same rule books and the same tab books and the same scales to play from. All of them. They had that left hand information, but nothing for the right hand. There was literally nothing there. So I think that's why you heard so many different players come up with different techniques, because they were always finding a way to like fight the string changes. Like that was such a big thing for like playing fast, like you know in 70s or kind of I think more 80s, when there was more neoclassical music around and everyone was just trying to outshred each other and things like that. It was like, how do you play faster? And there's so many things out there now. I think now guitar is having its place, or starting to have like a bit of a structure in terms of how it can be learnt. I think that's now starting to become a real thing, because if you think about other instruments like the piano or a violin or any of these kind of other classical instruments, there's usually quite a straightforward road in terms of how you practice, like, you know, what does this hand do? What does that hand do? There's like a very uniform kind of road to how it's played. But there's not really with the guitar. I think that's why it's open to so much interpretation and why so many people have been able to innovate on that instrument, because there's not a clear road. But I think that's beginning to get more and more paved as time goes on. I'll maybe pass on the baton to someone else, but yeah, I would say that's a kind of good summary of what I think about the modern guitar player at the moment.
Absolutely. And, you know, in what you've just said there is very much kind of where I get to as an answer in my post, which is really that at the end of the day, you and I are talking about the same thing whenever we talk about innovation or problem solving, which is that the instrument presents a number of flaws that the player, depending on who the player is as well, because we're all different. We all have different hands, bodies, minds, you know, we all have a different set of kind of tools, if you like, to problem solve, and we're also aiming for different things as well. And I'm glad you mentioned guys like Troy Grady as well, because I think you're seeing with the more that people dig into the physics of the instrument as well and what it means to play the instrument, you're starting to see people really take that advice on board and come out with really original voices even today. I happen to think as well that the electric guitar is an instrument that you can still pick up, you can still spend a lot of time on, and you can craft your own voice that nobody's ever really heard, you know, using whether it's technology or certain techniques. I think of guys like Stanley Jordan, or I think of guys like obviously Alan Holdsworth as well. I'd put Tosin Abasi in there as well, as guys who have completely revolutionized the way that they are playing, but they've not gone out of their way to deliberately play in a different way. They've gone out of their way to explore something that perhaps has not been explored before, but also to sort of problem solve something that that has maybe never been solved as well, which is really interesting in a sense. And it's a really funny thing to compare ourselves to the only other harmony instrument that there is, which we would have to look at the piano for. The piano being one of those instruments that I think, and I do make this claim, and I'm making it, I suppose, with a little kind of asterisk, that it's really up to the listener or to the reader and what they think about this. But looking at the piano really is the ultimate Western music instrument for range, for polyphony, for, you know, harmony, for all of these kind of things, for volume even as well sometimes. And this is also another point that I make in the post, is that the piano is a very much limited instrument in terms of the generation of sound next to the creation of it. Of course, every instrument can create sound, but the generation of sound can only really be hit by pressing a key. Generation being the physical process of hitting something. Whereas I think the really cool thing now is you're seeing all these great guitar players. You and I, Callum, talked about guys like Tim Henson as well, who are really changing the way of how the guitar is heard, but also how the guitar is approached physically. which is a really cool thing. You know, we think about the ways in which the strings can actually be well, how they can be kind of hit or what's the word, put into motion, I suppose, to generate a sound. You know, you can pluck things, you can tap things, you can use harmonics as well. You can strum things as well. You can hit them. I suppose there's a whole barrage of different techniques that you could use to make the instrument work. And it's really funny, and I'm sure we'll get onto this as well, but all of us being guitar teachers, I've always found it really encouraging to dig into the specific way in which my students approach their instruments, whether that's from a technical aspect or whether that's from an interest in harmony or an interest in trying to recreate a sound. Perhaps that's in the work that I do in trying to emulate, say, piano players in my own investigations of the instrument, or it's others trying to investigate, say, saxophone players or voices as well, you know, because we hear guys like Derek Trucks who've worked with a slide and they sound as close to a human voice as I think we've ever heard, which is incredible, really. And you can go back to a lot of the early sort of Delta blues guys as well, who very much explored that, because the point was to try to get closer to the human voice. And so it led to a whole innovation, you know, a real kind of flourishing moment for the guitar as an instrument to really explore it. And so whilst we can see it as innovation, at the end of the day, the way that I would at least kind of categorize it would be through this idea of problem solving, which is really cool. And, you know, we think about this a lot in terms of the role of the guitar and what it means to be a guitar player today. In some ways, we are the most versatile instrument in the room sometimes, because we control harmony, but we don't necessarily have to do that. We have a rhythmic aspect to us as well. Sometimes we have a melodic aspect, and perhaps only a melodic aspect. And perhaps we can do all of those things at the same time without the need of another instrument around us, which is really, really amazing as well. And you're starting to see that the guitar truly has a role for all kinds of different things as well. So the role is obviously kind of another part of what does it mean to be a guitar player. But I think of guys like, and again, something else that I mentioned is guys like Charlie Christian, who are pivotal in taking the guitar from the back of the band as being a rhythmic instrument to the front of the band, where it becomes the source of enjoyment, or it becomes the source of the melody and the harmony and the real interest perhaps in phrasing or in soloing for whatever the performance sort of requires. But yeah, it's another thing that really tests our creativity to what is it that we want to do with the guitar as well. And that I suppose in turn inspires us to really approach it in a different way as well. But Reese, how would you think about the future of the guitar as well? Because that's a question that I'm interested in hearing an answer from you.
Oh, I'm not sure how much I have to say on the matter, but it's funny because when I heard Callum talking about Eddie Van Halen, I was thinking about an experience. This is not directly answering the question at all, but I was thinking about when I heard Ted Green improvising Baroque music on guitar, and I had the same experience. I was like, how is that possible? It's just, that blew my mind. But yeah, sorry, what was your question again, Jack?
So I was asking you about, what do you think the future of the guitar is? Because we're seeing all this really interesting stuff coming out from players who are, I suppose, really revolutionizing the approach to the guitar, from whether it's a theory angle or whether it's from a technical angle, or perhaps it's even the guitar changing. Like, what do you think the future of the instrument really is?
I mean, when I think about the future of guitar right now, there are a few things I think. The first is that technically, I don't think we've reached the limit of what's possible on guitar at all. Because there are people like Tim Henson doing all this mad stuff that nobody was doing 5 years ago. I didn't see anybody doing that kind of stuff 5 years ago. And then there are people, you know, just kind of putting extra strings on the guitar, you know? And I don't even know what, like, people use these days, but you can get like a 9-string guitar. And I don't know how I would use that. I'm just trying to work out how to use 6. But I wonder how far we'll go with adding strings to the instrument as well, because it seems that a lot of people get on well with that. I don't personally, because I'm just a simpleton 6-string slinger. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of think about the technical side, but also the side of adding more to the guitar, but then tonally as well. I think that there are a lot of people doing interesting things with that. For example, I think what Kurt Rosenwinkel's doing with his sound is really interesting and unique. And yeah, I don't have an answer like as to where the guitar will be. Nobody does, because we can't tell the future. But Yeah, I imagine there'll be much more integration with stuff like MIDI potentially. Like it'll be more of a normal thing because I know now you can get a Fishman pickup and like have a MIDI guitar sound whilst using your guitar, but I don't think it's quite there yet. But I imagine you'll have like a guitar that is just totally compatible with MIDI in say 20 or even 10 years maybe. I've also saw people creating guitars that you can literally change the pickup in like just by changing a thing. Like it's already got like three pickups and you just switch it around, which I think is just uh insane. You know, I'm already like so overwhelmed by having a line 6 helix that can do any amp sound I want pretty much imaginable, but then adding that dimension into my guitar, like it's gonna happen. um but yeah, I mean, those are just some thoughts, kind of just spewing my imagination at this point. But Callum, what are you thinking about the future of guitar? What do you think it's going to look like in 10 years?
Um, what it's going to look like?
Or like how
How it
how it might be
develops.
used? Yeah.
Yeah. I think from like I suppose a physical point of view, one of the things that I kind of picked up on quite early that was so futuristic was I was really into Muse when I was younger. I was a really kind of influential band at that time when I was growing up, or like high school, kind of into college. But when I don't know if either of you have heard of a Chaos Pad, but Chaos Pad is like I kind of I think it's a MIDI controlled thing, but there's like kind of pad that is on the back of one of his guitars, so it's like sat just behind the bridge of a Manson guitar. I think that's like a guitar company in England, um, and yeah, it's I can't remember how to describe what it does, but there's maybe say he plays like a harmonic and he can like maybe sweep through like a frequency spectrum almost like a kind of like an envelope filter or something like that. So there's so much audio processing, and that was for a gig in 2007. Like that was a long time ago. So I think, as you were saying, Reese, the limitations from a physical point of view, tonal point of view, in terms of like audio processing and things like that's there's so many things that I could name, or sort of bands, individuals who just use audio effects a lot to create completely different sounds. And I've definitely been there myself because it's something I really enjoy. I really, really enjoy just having like a bunch of things, you know, a bunch of pedals and just fiddling about with things and seeing what kind of results that you can get. It's one of the things that picked up recently, more recently from a composer, Mick Gordon, who done the Doom Eternal stuff, Doom Eternal game soundtrack and things like that. And he's one of these composers that for one of the pieces, or for some of the songs in the soundtrack, used that 9-string guitar and got that really, really heavy sound. But there was also a completely different side to it where he had essentially like 4 chains of pedals, like 4 pedal setups, and the only input that he was allowed to use to create a lot of the sounds in Doom was a sine wave. The purest form of music, the purest form of anything that you can do in music, and it's he manipulated that in 4 completely different arrays or 4 different lineups of pedals to create these completely different soundscapes, and the results are mad. The results, I just find it so fascinating that just like you started with this one tiny sound, that's the basis of like all sound basically, and you can manipulate it into anything. Like I don't know if you've heard any of that Doom Eternal stuff, or like there's a really good kind of talk where he demonstrates it and talks about his process from like, we started with this and we put it through these chains, and this is the result that we got, until it eventually works up to that sound that everyone is associated with Doom. So I really could go on for quite a long time with, you know, the audio effects side of things and the technique side of things. But I think one of the things that brings all these things together is actually just the wealth of information that we have. I feel like, as I was saying earlier, with the books and stuff and materials that maybe you had through 70s, 80s, they were all kind of the same. And a lot of people were maybe just kind of, you know, learning from those books. And that's the majority of the information that you had. You just kind of had to make do with those scales and songs and riffs from other bands. But now, you know, you can search up a band's rig, a click of, you know, a couple of clicks, and start taking influence from that straight away. So as soon as you like a sound, you can figure out exactly how it's made and maybe even start working on it that day if you've got the same facilities. So I think because of that, like the as I was saying, with the tonal, the physical, and the kind of technique as well. All these things are just accelerated, which is why I think you're getting so many interesting ideas at the moment with Tim Henson, Tosin Abasi, just yeah, all people like that. It's definitely becoming such a versatile instrument in a myriad of different ways.
So that actually leads me on to a question I do have for the both of you, is that we're talking about diversifying the guitar again. And, as technology sort of moves on and the faster it moves, we have this issue where there still seems to be no unified way of learning it. There's still no unified way of playing the guitar, or for even being able to search out a method. It actually gets harder and harder to find the one method that works for you. And, I think something that all of us have talked about, we've talked about this both on the podcast and privately amongst ourselves, really, is that we're always adjusting things in our playing, whether it's how we hold the pick, whether it's something to do with the left hand, whether it's spacing, any of those kind of things, or perhaps it's about finding a sound. These things, as you say, Callum, the guitar is such a malleable instrument, in that there's still so much to discover about it for yourself. I think sometimes it can leave people feeling really bewildered by how much is really out there. And so perhaps one of my questions here, I'd love to know what you both think on this, is, has there ever been a situation of thinking, man, this is too much, I don't know what road to go down, there are so many avenues that I don't really know what to go down first? Or have you ever had that experience with students where it's been really hard to direct people?
Definitely. I can think of probably about 5 students straight away who have told me, it's like, oh, I just signed up to TrueFire and I've got all these courses and I bought this book and Rick Beato's got a good page. And I think that's great. I really do. But I think, unfortunately, the downsides of that is that there's just so many, you're learning so many approaches at once, which I think for a certain student that can work. But I know for me that didn't work. I kind of just pursued a path for a while and then I deviated and maybe followed something else for a while. So I think the evolution of technology and how it kind of goes in line with guitar is great, but I also feel that there must be a lot of people who just feel so overwhelmed when they go on the internet. It's like, all right, I want to learn how to play a chord, and they go on YouTube and it's like, oh, well, where do I go? It's like there are thousands and thousands of videos on how to play Wonderwall. What one's the best? And yeah, I guess to answer the question, yeah, I think what's it called? Option paralysis or something like that it's a real thing, and I see it happening all the time. And even for me, when I'm trying to find teaching materials, like say someone wants to learn a song and I'm trying to find a transcription, because sometimes that's the easiest approach. Like just going through them all and be like, oh, that one's rubbish or that one's good, or it's like there's just so much out there. Sometimes it's better just to do it all yourself, because then you trust your own process.
Jack, could you just say the question once more? I'm just I've already forgotten.
Yeah, sure. So there was a bit of a two-parter to that question, and as Reese kind of spoke about, there's a situation with students as well, feeling that there's so much to explore that you don't know where to start. But also, for yourself as well, there's something in, do you ever feel lost yourself in the sea of information that we have, and how difficult it really is to establish a unified method for yourself?
Yeah, I think this is a tricky one, just because of the way that I think I work when it comes to maybe trying to problem solve in a situation, in a musical scenario. I'll usually just do like literally whatever it takes to try and make that thing happen, regardless if it's like an unorthodox method and it's not too practical. And what I've found actually over the years, being in bands where maybe I've been trying to take on too much and just trying to fulfill a role, it's actually quite detrimental to think that you can just like go completely off course from what is maybe known, and like still be okay. And for the most part, I had been, but there is a point where like that ROI is just like not there anymore. It's like the amount of time that you need to kind of put into something when you're seeing results, but maybe it's just taken far too much time. I've definitely experienced that with, playing keyboards in bands and stuff like that as well, where you're not just a keyboard player, but you're a synthesist as well. You've got like, analog synths and stuff like that. And that's a completely different beast to learn how to work when you're just talking about, again, simple sine waves and then manipulating them It's just, yeah, there's a lot there, but that's definitely one takeaway that I would say is that if you are that way inclined, where you just think you just solve the problem like no matter what, it's great. It does take you far, but so you can sometimes just get completely lost down that rabbit hole. Before you know it, you could have spent just a lot of time doing something that maybe actually isn't worthwhile.
I would like to add that I think the beauty of the fact that guitar, it has several well-trodden paths, but there is no sort of follow this book, this is the one you need. The beauty is that we are still innovating it, and I mean, to me, that is super inspiring. Like, I'm like, oh, great. So it's like there is space for me to find a unique voice on the instrument, and I think that's wicked. You know, to me, I'm like, oh wow, that's just inspiring. So that's one positive that I would like to add.
And I think from both of what you guys have said, something has really popped up in that the limitation of the instrument is in some ways both its hindrance and its help. In that, if we were to look at an instrument, and I make this analogy quite a lot with students as well. When we look at the guitar itself next to a piano, I don't play any piano. Let me just preface that by saying I don't play any piano at all. But I can figure out where B and C are, because I know there's no B sharp. So I know there's a bit of a space between them. And I also know that there's no E and there's no F. There's a little bit of kind of guessing around there and realizing there's, say three sharps that happen each a tone away. And then you've sort of figured out loosely how the piano works. But from the guitar, if you were to ask a piano player to figure out how the guitar works, well, that's a whole other ball game, because they don't have an answer for what the open strings are. If you pointed to any of the notes on the neck, there's no obvious indication about, no B sharps, or there's no, there's no, I suppose, solid way of being able to understand the instrument just from first look. So it immediately creates the problem when you pick it up as any kind of musician, as a guitar player or not. And it's very much about trying to kind of solve it. And, there are so many great methods from education that we've tried to problem solve around. So whether that's, say, the cage system, whether it's even tuning in fourths as well, is another way in which people sort of get around the issues that the guitar presents. And there are so many different ways that we can problem solve, but really in some ways, the benefit of the guitar being such a limited instrument is that there is no limit to the amount of ways in which you can problem solve something. And in fact, the creative aspect is that as long as you're being creative and as long as you are continuing to be curious at the instrument and try things that are perhaps, very risky, perhaps, you are changing the role of the instrument, perhaps you're changing something to do with how you hear harmony as well, or the tuning, or that sort of thing. It's about taking risks and knowing that the problem to solve is really unlocking your creativity. That's the only problem really to solve. So unless anybody has any final thoughts, I think it would maybe be about time to wrap everything up. But what do you guys think?
Absolutely. No, I was just gonna unmute myself to say, yeah, I think that's a good shout. Yeah, for me that was a very interesting conversation to sit in on, because going into it, I felt like I didn't actually have much to add, but the way the conversation unfolded, it was like, I can have a think about ways that it relates to me. And I hope you, the listener, right now are thinking, oh yeah, like I'd never thought about, what the guitar might look like for me in 10 years or 20 years, or my children if they take it up, But yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody for checking out the podcast thus far. And Jack, do you want to remind everybody, where can they support the podcast?
So you guys can support the podcast by simply listening across YouTube or by Spotify or iTunes as well. I believe, are we on Tidal yet? what else are we on?
Not yet. We're not. iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube so far.
Cool.
And Callum, where can they find this beautiful merchandise to support the podcast?
Link is in the description.
Exactly. We're trying to get better at just pointing people to the description, because the URL for our merch store is so long. But Callum is proudly displaying his mug to you right now if you're watching on YouTube.
It's got a little spin there as well.
Nice. Awesome. Well, if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Big up to Jack Handyside for hosting this episode. Thank you so much, Jack. And yeah, we look forward to catching you in the next one.